Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith reveals her plan to invoke the Sovereignty Act over federal clean energy regulations. Plus, Israel and Hamas extend their ceasefire for 2 more days. And 60 Russian drones are intercepted over Kyiv in what's being called the most massive drone strike over Ukraine's capital.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. A 4-day ceasefire, which was due to expire Monday between Hamas and Israel, has been extended by 2 days. Israel offered to keep the ceasefire in place if Palestinian militants free more hostages. Hamas said for the first time it would extend the truce. So far, 62 of the roughly 240 hostages captured by Hamas on October 7th have been released in exchange for more than 3 dozen Israeli-held Palestinian prisoners. There are reports Hamas may release another 20 hostages. Israel says some 200 trucks of aid entered Gaza today. 4 of the container trucks were carrying diesel fuel, while 4 others were carrying cooking gas. But the United Nations says it's not enough. There were emotional reunions as Israeli hostages returned home. In this video from Associated Press, we see scenes of joy as a mother and her 12-year-old daughter were reunited with their family after being freed by Hamas. Also among the released were 2 girls aged 9 and 12 who ran into the arms of their waiting relatives. As of Monday, at least 64 of the more than 200 hostages have been released since the ceasefire began. Most of the released in the first batches were women and children who were kidnapped and taken to Gaza during the October 7th incursion by Hamas. And in Tel Aviv, people danced while carrying a giant Torah scroll to celebrate the release. But a vigil was also held by families and supporters of Israelis still being held by Hamas in Gaza.
And our heart will never be full. It will never stop bleeding of the whole nation till the end, till the last kidnap will come back and be together with his family.
Meanwhile, Palestinians in the West Bank welcomed the release of prisoners as part of the ceasefire deal. More than 3 dozen Palestinian prisoners returned home to the occupied West Bank, and Palestinian families in Jerusalem were rejoicing after being reunited with relatives released from Israeli prisons. The released prisoners were given a hero welcome by several hundred well-wishers in Ramallah. The procession of freed prisoners fueled massive crowds of Palestinians into a chanting and screaming frenzy. According to one of the prisoners interviewed by Associated Press, they were unaware of the situation that unfolded outside of the confines of the prison in the West Bank and Gaza. And according to Foreign Affairs expert Lisa Daftari, Israel's main goal is to get their hostages back, but that's not their only goal.
Remember, the Israelis have 2 goals here, right? The primary one is to get the hostages back, and the secondary one is to decimate Hamas, which is really doing the world a favor and taking this terror organization off the map. But should the intermediaries convince Israel not to go back in, I wonder and I worry that they will be able to rearm and reload and start this process all over again.
Catch my full interview with Lisa Daftari of the Foreign Desk coming up after Business News. Russia has unleashed its largest drone attack on Ukraine since the start of its full-scale invasion nearly 2 years ago. On Saturday morning, Russia launched 75 Iranian-made drones against Ukraine, with the main target being the capital city of Kyiv. At least 5 people were injured, including a child. The hours-long assault saw several buildings damaged by falling debris from downed drones. Ukraine's Air Force says it destroyed 74 of the 75 drones. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith announced her plans to invoke the government's Sovereignty Act today over federal clean energy regulations. Smith spoke to reporters late this morning in advance of a motion being tabled in the legislature. Smith says she wants to introduce the Sovereignty Act to protect Alberta from the federal government's proposed 2035 net zero electricity grid regulations.
If the federal government has its way, many people will be left without electricity that they can pay for on a power grid that will fall short or even fail in a typical Alberta winter or summer. We refuse to go along with this plan. Well, Albertans must have access to affordable and reliable power when and where they need it. It's a matter of health and safety and a matter of financial reality. No one should have to choose between paying their utility bills or buying needed groceries. But it's also a matter of law. As I mentioned earlier, the Constitution is clear. Electricity is a provincial responsibility. The federal government would do well to remember that. They have already lost 2 recent court battles in which their overreach into provincial jurisdiction was struck down by the courts. Ottawa's approach is also at odds with reality. Although Alberta leads the country in renewable investment, we still cannot use it for the majority of our electricity needs. For Albertans to have electricity they can count on, our province needs more baseload power from natural gas. Alberta does not have extensive hydroelectric resources that they enjoy in other provinces. We don't yet have nuclear as they do in Ontario, and that will take a lot of time and money to get there. Natural gas is the foundation of our electricity system in Alberta.
The act, which allows the province to reject federal laws or regulations when it thinks harm is caused to Alberta, was passed by the UCP government last year. Meanwhile, Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley issued a statement in response saying, a quote, "The UCP is invoking a dishonest and illegal stunt that jeopardizes investment certainty, breaches treaty rights across the country, weakens national unity, and embarrasses Albertans on the global stage. Energy experts, investors, and forward-looking Albertans all believe we can and should achieve net zero much sooner than 2050, which should attract billions in investment and create thousands of jobs." Notley says this is a distraction from Albertans' priorities. It is incompetent and backward and does nothing to secure Alberta's economic future. And in other news, Alberta's NDP is demanding accountability from the province for oil sand leaks in northern Alberta. Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, who is the Alberta NDP critic for environment, parks and climate resilience, says several incidents have occurred over the past 18 months at the Carroll site.
During some of these incidents, laws were broken, consultation with First Nations did not occur, and repeated attempts were made to downplay the severity of what has happened. Look at the leak from the Carroll oil sands facility on November 13th, the 3rd from that exact facility this year. A total of 670,000 litres were released into the river. That, in the sediment, it was 4 times the legal limit. This is the 3rd incident. In the first, the leakage from Carroll tailings ponds contained arsenic, dissolved metals, and carcinogenic hydrocarbons. In the second, a draining pond full of pollutants overflowed, and more than 5 million litres of contaminant water leaked into the environment. This is devastating for wildlife, for the local environment, for the water, and for the people who drink it, including the people of Athabasca, Chippewa, and First Nation.
Calahoo Stonehouse says that in none of the incidents did MLAs contact the people about the leaks or keep them updated, including Minister of Energy and Minerals Brian Jean, who in a November 15th post on X said he toured the Carroll oil sands site and described the company's commitment to environmental protection as, quote, top-notch. In other news, Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Leach's lawyer has opened his client's defense by arguing there is no direct evidence linking her to any unlawful activities. Leach and her co-accused Chris Barber are charged with various offenses connected to the massive demonstration against COVID-19 restrictions that gridlocked downtown Ottawa for weeks early last year. The day after the Crown wrapped up its case last week, the defense filed a motion arguing that Leach and Barber shouldn't be viewed as co-conspirators because their actions weren't criminal. There's been no ruling on that yet. Calgary police are investigating after a woman was found shot this morning. Police say they found the woman just before 7 a.m. near the intersection of 17th Avenue and 38th Street Southeast. They say the woman was seriously injured but aren't sure exactly where the shooting took place. Paramedics took her to hospital in serious condition. Police say it is not known if she was targeted. And in a separate incident, Calgary police are investigating a targeted shooting outside a busy restaurant in the southeast part of the city on Saturday. Officers were called to a parking lot near the Earl's Kitchen and Bar on 130 Avenue and 51st Street Southeast around 4:30 p.m. A 23-year-old man in a vehicle was shot. His injuries were non-life-threatening. And RCMP say charges have been laid in the death of a Red Deer resident last week, which also prompted a lockdown of a school and advisory for neighborhood residents to shelter in place. Police say they responded to a firearms complaint early Friday afternoon at an apartment building and found 26-year-old Shali Jenner shot dead. Kanoya Christian School went into lockdown status as a precaution. Later that day, 32-year-old Christopher Ferguson from Red Deer was arrested, and police say he now faces charges of manslaughter with a firearm. Political leaders in Manitoba are condemning a weekend shooting in a downtown Winnipeg home that left 4 people dead and 1 seriously injured. Winnipeg Mayor Scott Gillingham called the shooting, quote, shocking and disturbing, saying such violence is a troubling reminder that there is still too much violent and gun-related crime in the city. Premier Wab Kinew said he's asked his justice minister to work with the city to, quote, strengthen our shared approach to public safety. Police have identified the victims but say they don't have any suspects and have not released any information about a possible motive. A 15-year-old Lethbridge boy who was reported missing last week has been found deceased. Lethbridge police say Hayden Nash was last seen by family and friends on the evening of November 20th. Police are not indicating if foul play is involved, but have only said that they are not releasing any further information. Our condolences to the family. Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services responded to a structure fire over the weekend at 4:23 p.m. on Saturday, November 23rd. Crews from 4 stations responded to the call on West Side Drive. They were able to knock the fire down and stop it from spreading. No injuries to crews or occupants was recorded. The cause of the fire was due to an improperly installed wood-burning fireplace. Damage is estimated to be $40,000. The Lethbridge Police Service is partnering with several community agencies to make Christmas more merry for those less fortunate. The 4th annual charity check stop will be held on Saturday, December 2nd from 11 until 3 p.m. Officers will be on site at the Park Place Mall's West parking lot to collect new toys, gifts, donations of money, and non-perishable food items for the Christmas Hope campaign. One of the Christmas Hope agencies is Lethbridge Family Services. Michelle Gallucci, Director of Advancement and Communications for LFS, says in recent years, the charity check stop has provided a large boost to her organization's Angel Tree campaign.
So Christmas Hope has 3 toy agencies that share this this charity check stop event, and if we can get about 2,500 gifts this year, gifts and toys and donations in one shot, that means each one of us will have 800 and change in toys, which will help about 300 children. So it's a really important event for us because we're coming into December with almost 4,000 children registered just for Angel Tree, and Shop of Wonders is going to hit 2,000. It's a lot of children this year.
In addition to Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree campaign, Christmas Hope coordinates donations for the Interfaith Food Bank, the Lethbridge Food Bank, My City Cares Shop of Wonders, the Salvation Army's Toys for Tots, and Volunteer at Lethbridge. The University of Lethbridge is receiving funding of nearly $700,000 for agriculture research. The donation came from Results-Driven Agriculture Research, or RDAR. Board chair for the nonprofit, Dr. David Chalik, says the funds will help boost the research of 3 scientists at the university.
The fact that the 3 professors, Hoover, Conchu, and Sanford, are rooted here in this institution brings a lot of value not only to the institution but farmers in this area. Research in bees, irrigation, potatoes, and beef cattle is really important to the ag economy and GDP here in Alberta. The spin-offs from the research that is funded goes very deeply into the supply chain.
One of the researchers, Dr. Shelley Hoover, says the funding will help her research on bees to continue for another 5 years.
We have a large project that we're just starting that's looking at the effects of environmental change, and particularly heat and drought, on canola pollination. We have a project, Dr. Leslie Holmes in my lab is working on a project looking at the honeybee gut microbiome. So she's developed a non-destructive way to sample the microbiome of queen honeybees and look at the effects of stressors such as antibiotics or temperature stress on the gut microbiome of bees. We have another project looking at queen honeybees and how best to manage to produce them, how to introduce them to colonies, and the development of their pheromones and as they mature.
The Alberta Wilderness Association says CST Canada Coal in Grand Cache must prove it can operate safely before the provincial regulator looks at its request to deepen an open pit mine. CST is asking the Alberta Energy Regulator for permits to dig deeper at the open pit mines. It operates about 430 kilometers northwest of Edmonton. But the association points out the company has had 3 large releases of wastewater over the last year and faces 2 investigations by the AER. In documents filed with the regulator, the company says it is cooperating with the investigations and adds the application is not connected to the wastewater releases. There are many stories from the past that we can learn from and be inspired by. Deanna Storfy of Acting Up Drama talks about her passion for sharing these stories through one-person drama performances.
I'm a storyteller, and so I love to bring the stories of faithful Christ followers of the past to life for people and audiences today, just to encourage their faith and also to encourage believers and non-believers alike, just with the goodness of God and his loving kindness that he has shown through the stories of what we would call even Christian heroes of the past.
Catch the full interview with Deanna Storfy and BCN's Michael Clausen coming up later in our program. Well, we do need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with a full look at our weather forecast. Welcome back. Well, we have been remaining fairly above seasonable for this time of year, as we saw today, high of 5, high of 9 tomorrow. Now, seasonal high for this time of year is more like around 1 or 2 degrees. So we were doing pretty good up until later this week. That's when we're going to get more into that range as we get into Wednesday there, high of 1 degree, down to the minuses for both Thursday and Friday, -1 for a high on Thursday, -3 on a Friday before we get back up into those pluses, 2 degree for a high on Saturday, and on Sunday all the way up to 7 degrees to round out that 7-day forecast. So then we'll be back up above seasonable. So average high for this time of year, as I was saying, 2 degrees, average low -10, 12 was our high temperature on this day back in 1949, and it was -34 back in 1985. That's very, very cold. 8:01, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this afternoon at 4:36, and of course those days getting shorter and shorter as we're getting closer to that winter solstice coming up in December. On the west coast tomorrow, 8 degrees in Victoria, looking at clearing skies. Clearing throughout the afternoon there in Vancouver as well, high of 6 degrees, 7 for a high in Edmonton. Same thing for Calgary. We got a couple of 7s there happening across Alberta tomorrow with clear skies. By the way, Lethbridge seeing winds 40 to 60 kilometers per hour, even though we're seeing that nice 9-degree day. On the rest of the prairie, same thing. We're looking at lots of wind, up to 50K winds in Saskatoon, 4 degrees for a high, 3 for a high in Regina. Same thing, we're looking at 50K winds, and Winnipeg could speak up to 60K winds, 2 for a high there. They are looking at the possibility also of some flurries there. Sorry, Winnipeg. Hate to break that to you. In Toronto, also looking at 2 centimeters of snow, 0 for a high, 40% chance of flurries. In Ottawa, -5 for a high. Montreal expecting a high of 1 degree tomorrow, and also looking at 40% a chance of flurries. As we move over into Atlantic Canada, 0 for a high in Fredericton, could see a chance of flurries as well. Halifax looking at showers that could turn into flurries. 6 degrees for a high, and same thing there. Charlottetown, 3 for a high, flurries and showers. St. John's looking at a lot of precipitation tomorrow. Could see 10 to 15 millimeters of rain. Got a couple of weather statements in effect as well, including a wind warning. Could see up to 100 kilometers per hour winds along parts of the coast there with a high of 9 degrees. So there you have it. That is your forecast. The 5-day post-American Thanksgiving shopping bonanza is capping off today with Cyber Monday. The biggest online shopping day of the year is actually a multiple-day event for several major retailers. The U.S. National Retail Federation expects shoppers will spend more this year than last year, but it's also predicting the pace of spending will slow. The union representing 2,100 flight attendants at Air Transat says workers have overwhelmingly voted to approve a strike if they cannot reach a new contract with the airline. The Canadian Union of Public Employees says the flight attendants voted 99.8% in favor of backing the mandate. Dominic Lavassier, president of the Air Transat component of QB, says the next few weeks of negotiations will be critical. Lavassier says it's still possible to reach a new contract without resorting to a strike, but the union's members have high expectations. Lion Electric says it's cutting 150 jobs, or about 10% of its total workforce. The company that designs and builds all-electric trucks, buses, and minibuses says the move is necessary to reduce costs and improve its ability to reach profitability targets. The cuts affect workers in manufacturing, product development, and administrative functions, both in Canada and the United States. Earlier this month, the company reported a loss of $19.9 million US in its third quarter, compared with a loss of $17.2 million a year earlier. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 70 points on the day to finish at 20,032. The Dow was down 56 to 35,333. The S&P 500 was down 8 points to 4550, and the Nasdaq was down 9 points to finish at 14,241. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 51 cents to 75.03 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 6 cents to 2.80 US. Gold was up 10 cents to 2,014.24 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to 24.65 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.98 per bushel, barley's at $6.84, canola is at $15.50, and corn is at $8.15 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.48 to $168.78. Feeder cattle were down 74 cents to $228.64. Lean hogs were up 30 cents to $67.88, and the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.42 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, a 4-day ceasefire, which was due to expire Monday between Israel and Hamas, has been extended by 2 days. Israel offered to keep the ceasefire in place if Palestinian militants free more hostages. So far, 62 of the roughly 240 hostages captured by Hamas on October 7th have been released in exchange for more than 36 Israeli-held Palestinian prisoners. There are reports Hamas may release another 20 hostages. After the break, we speak with our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who weighs in further on the Israeli-Hamas situation. And when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, be sure to visit our webpage at bridgecitynews.ca.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Lethbridge's Christmas Hope campaign has begun, and there's plenty of opportunities throughout the month of December to spread the holiday spirit by giving to those who are less fortunate. The annual Toy Mountain at Center Village Mall goes until December 22nd. Drop off new unwrapped toys like stuffed animals, toy trucks, baby dolls, and anything fun that brings a smile to a child's face. Discover unique finds for all the people on your Christmas list at the Lethbridge Handmade Market on Saturday, December 2nd at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center's UFA Hall. Over 115 handmade artisans will be on hand to show their various crafts, art, jewelry, and all kinds of things. The market opens at 9 a.m. with a $7 admission. Kids 14 and under enter for free. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help make sandwiches, sort incoming donations, assist with Foot Friday, and many other opportunities to serve, receive training, and to provide support for this important cause of bringing hope to the hopeless. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Wars, cyber attacks, hostage and prisoner swaps. There is a lot to talk about in international news. So to dive into this in more detail, I'm bringing in Lisa Daftari, a foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, who joins us from Los Angeles. Lisa, welcome once again to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so Lisa, on Friday, a 4-day ceasefire was announced. Hostages held by Hamas were to be returned, and Palestinian prisoners held by Israel were to be set free. So, Lisa, tell us, how has this process been going? I think we're in day 4 now, aren't we?
We are in day 4. We just had breaking news not too long ago where they have decided to extend this truce for another couple of days. This is what we actually assumed would happen, that, that Qatar, the United States, the intermediaries would try to convince Israel, the IDF, to kind of scale back on its retaliation against Hamas. Remember, the Israelis have 2 goals here, right? The primary one is to get the hostages back, and the secondary one is to decimate Hamas, which is really doing the world a favor and taking this terror organization off the map. But should the intermediaries convince Israel not to go back in, I wonder and I worry that they will be able to rearm and reload and start this process all over again. And it's really an existential threat that Israel lives with. Now, remember, Israel evacuated the Gaza Strip in 2005, giving it full control over to the Palestinians, who then elected Hamas into office in 2007. Now, since then, we have had so many attacks daily. And of course, the Iron Dome, which is the Israeli technology that catches those missiles, has done a wonderful job in keeping Israelis safe. But this past massacre on October 7th just demonstrated to the world how sophisticated and well-endowed Hamas has become, with the help of Iran's regime in Qatar, in having funding, in having missiles, and having weapons. And then the world and the mainstream media cries about the Palestinian people in poverty and how they need help from Israel and the international community, but not from their own leadership. And that's really what brings us all together, is really explaining to the media, to the UN, to whoever needs to hear this, that this is a lopsided deal to begin with, right? So Israel got attacked on October 7th. I mean, brutal raping, setting people on fire. I mean, the words can't even describe how inhumane this attack was. And then now we're having a 3-to-1 prisoner to innocent civilian exchange. And each day we saw that there were some complications. Hamas demanding more, wanting humanitarian, they call it humanitarian, but they wanted the trucks to continue going in. And again, Jeanette, you and I talked about how we don't even know where these trucks are going or who's benefiting from the aid that's going into Gaza. So that's where we have it now. The truce has been extended, and let's see what comes out of this. Hopefully all the hostages get to go home.
Well, hopefully, because there's been so much celebration for these freed prisoners, and that's going on. And in the midst of all of this, Lisa, 2 men accused of collaborating with Israeli forces were executed by Palestinian factions in the West Bank. So what can you tell us about this?
This only demonstrates the brutality of Hamas. So when you have Palestinians killed by their own, this is two individuals who were accused of spying and collaborating with Israel, and they were publicly killed to show and demonstrate this symbolically that you cannot help Israel, the enemy. This is something that is indoctrinated within Palestinian society from a young age. They sing about killing Jews and becoming martyrs and getting rewarded for blowing themselves up. up, the way that they teach mathematics in school. If I kill 2 Jews today and 2 Jews tomorrow, how many have I killed? I mean, the Palestinian people do deserve better, but they deserve better from the beginning, from the time that they're young, under their own leadership. When the UN gives money to UNRWA to fund Palestinian schools, there should be a control. There should be some sort of just overlooking what they're doing and how they're teaching, and there should be better. I mean, how can we ever have peace when this is what they're doing? And you don't hear any outcry from the world when they're hanging 2 innocent Palestinians on alleged charges of espionage. But then, of course, they want to, just talk about Israel's war crimes, and the word genocide is thrown around so much. And again, Jeanette, I've talked about this a lot. I mean, my platform is obviously covering, world news and a lot of counterterrorism. We talk about all the innocent lives that have been lost in Syria and Yemen and Iraq and Afghanistan by the hands of Iran's regime. It hangs its own people. In the last 60 days this war has been going on, how many innocent Iranians have been hanged for nothing, for no reason at all, for peacefully protesting? And the world is silent about all those killings, and they only want to focus on this one incident, and they want to talk about Israel's retaliation against Hamas, a terror organization. They're calling this genocide.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And of course, at the same time now, Turkey and Iran are looking to have a growing friendship, as Turkish President Erdogan spoke with his Iranian counterpart about the war between Israel and Hamas, and U.S. involvement. But international criticism, of course, of Israel is growing. So, Lisa, can you maybe shed some light on this situation?
Turkey has, for the past decade or so, has been a frenemy of the West, of the United States in particular. They have wanted to double dip, meaning they want to be considered a Western nation, a modern nation in the Middle East. They want to be a part of all these acronymed organizations, but yet they also want to have a hand in what's going on in global terrorism and siding with extremists. And they haven't made the distinction yet that they will stand against terrorism. As a matter of fact, they've been quite vocal about their support of Hamas against Israel. They have been obviously growing closer to Iran's regime, who is funding this entire war against Israel. And now we have it, tangible evidence, where you have Erdogan meeting with Raisi, the president of Iran, really kind of cementing that relationship and really taking a side and taking a stance that is much more visible than we've seen ever before, where it was more like Turkey becoming more Islamist, cracking down on many laws inside the country, closing a lot of publications that were, kind of moderate or against the government. So definitely we're seeing a shift in Turkey moving more towards Iran. And of course, Qatar is the same thing. I mean, Qatar is considered the West's, this honest broker, and is involved right now in brokering this truce or the hostage and prisoner deal between Hamas and Israel. But yet, we know that the Qataris are funding Hamas. We know that they're housing and hiding and allowing Hamas leaders to live there lavishly. Why aren't they being called out on it? I think there's a lot that the West needs to do under the United States' leadership, of course, and we're not seeing this very, very strong leadership from the White House. And of course, it will have its consequences as we're seeing.
Right. Okay. Well, we might not be seeing it from the White House, but we're seeing a little bit of it in London. So, of course, there's been sizable turnouts, obviously, at Hamas rallies around the world. We've been seeing that, right, Lisa? But on Sunday, thousands of people assembled in London for a demonstration against anti-Semitism, and among them was former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So organizers are reportedly promoting this event as the largest protest of anti-Semitism since, 1936?
Yeah, this is wonderful because it is in response to the pro-Hamas protests we have seen in London that have been horrific. I mean, they have been extremely large in size, extremely violent. The police has basically backed down because it's been so difficult. They've even thought about bringing in military to help the police. This is in response to that, to say, there is a counter voice here, and it might not be violent and it might not be as loud, but it is definitely strong and it is definitely united. And that was a wonderful thing to see. Of course, Boris Johnson, setting an example. And I'll tell you who didn't set an example was the BBC, who told their reporter not to attend and not to cover it. This should be very much underscored. If you're going to the mainstream media for information about this war, please know where you're going and how it is influenced and how it is biased. Imagine a reporter not being allowed to cover something that's going on that is that sizable, that is that, important. On the flip side, we also had a BBC reporter who said, oops, I got the hospital report wrong. If you recall, it was a bomb that the world, and very quickly Hamas told the mainstream media, oh my gosh, Israel bombed the hospital, thousands have died. And meanwhile, it wasn't even true. And it was a mislodged missile from Palestinian Islamic Jihad that landed in a parking lot that there were no casualties, and definitely not in the thousands. So this BBC reporter said, yes, I got it wrong, but I'm not remorseful at all. So he's basically saying, I'm glad that my bias allowed me to report incorrectly so that people think a certain way. I mean, this is crazy. This is not ethical journalism. This is not where people should be getting their news, and we should all be informed. There should be the small font at the bottom should say, it comes with bias. This is not actual reporting.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the power of the media, huh? It's unreal. And of course, meanwhile, there in the U.S., there are confirmed reports that a municipal water authority in Pennsylvania was hacked by a cyber group backed by the Islamic Republic of Iran over the weekend. So what's going on there, Lisa?
Right. So we know that the Iran regime, besides funding all their different terror proxies around the world, and especially in the Middle East, they have also been fortifying their cyber capabilities. They have a cyber army, very proud of it. They have bots on Twitter. They have people going, to kind of respond on Instagram and all social media platforms. But on a more sophisticated and complex level, they have these hacks against major infrastructures. And over the weekend, they hit a Pennsylvania water company. And of course, they're flexing their muscles. They're testing out, how far can we take this? And of course, there have been no consequences for Iran's regime. It is funding terror. It has a hand, obviously, in a complete hand in funding the current war against Israel, funding many different terror proxies, hitting the United States' assets in Syria and Iraq. And yet, they get benefits. They get money. They just got another $10 million released to them from $10 billion rather released to them from the Biden administration to be able to, collect those funds. We've had vital sanctions removed from Iran's regime so that they've been able to sell oil upwards of $60 billion in terms of their oil revenue. And of course, we have seen that they are begging for a deal. So when Washington keeps going back to them and saying, pretty please, we shouldn't expect anything else than for them to really push the envelope. And in this case, with cyber attacks, reminding the United States that they have these capabilities.
Yeah, no, unbelievable. And we're so focused on the Israeli-Hamas war right now. We need to remember there's another whole war going on between Russia and Ukraine. And very importantly, this past Saturday, at least, 5 people were injured in Kyiv in what city officials are calling the most massive Russian drone strike on the Ukrainian capital since the start of the war. So what is this? 60 drones were intercepted during the airborne assault, Lisa?
Where did those drones come from? The Iran regime is giving Russia drones. Again, we are fueling both sides of this war, and I don't know if people are paying attention. The United States is giving billions of dollars to Ukraine to fight or to at least ward off Russian invasion. On the other side, we're giving money to Iran's regime, which is making drones and selling them to Russia, which it is using against Ukraine in this war. So it's frustrating to watch this, because as there's more talk and international pressure for some sort of ceasefire or some sort of resolution, on the other hand, we're seeing Russia really up the level of fighting, and attacks are getting more brutal every day. Where this will go, we don't know, but it doesn't look like there's any off-ramp for Russia anytime soon.
Right, and it's been going on for almost 2 years, and now what we're seeing, U.S. and Germany are reportedly pushing Ukraine to negotiate with Russia. So this seems to contradict what their past actions have shown. So what are you able to tell us about this?
Yeah, so of course, as you said, we're coming up on 2 years. So the international community obviously wants to for this to come to an end. We all do, right? This is a senseless war. So as they're pushing Ukraine to come to some sort of resolution with Russia, at the same time, we're seeing that Russia is probably not interested unless they get everything, and more. So it will be interesting to see if Ukraine even agrees to it, which I don't think Zelensky will do that. I think the only thing that Zelensky will ask for is more money, and not for for any truce or any ceasefire. It doesn't look like either side or either man wants to back down anytime soon, but we are seeing international pressure to at least move towards that direction.
Yeah. Okay, so turning our attention now over to China. So in Beijing, a surge of respiratory illnesses across China has drawn the attention of the World Health Organization. So China's health ministry says the illness is caused by the flu and other known pathogens, but not the coronavirus. So how are they looking to deal with this one, Lisa?
Yeah, it looks like they're not being transparent about this, just like COVID, and that's what's scary about this. I talked to some physicians over the weekend, actually, about this, and they think it's this very serious pneumonia, which could be as deadly as COVID was. They're worried that that will be the new flu that hits us here in the West in this coming season, unfortunately. As you know, pneumonia, very similar to COVID, a respiratory illness that requires hospitalization, ventilation, oxygen, et cetera. Something that is, we're watching, and obviously we can't get any straight answers out of China where this came from and why its origins are leading us back to China is obviously the main question here. But on this end, we will learn how to deal with it just like we have. But again, more pressure on China, more pressure on Iran's regime, more pressure on Qatar. We're just not seeing it, and of course the consequences are here, and we're seeing them.
Yeah. She is our foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari. Thanks so much for joining us today from Los Angeles. Great to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, most of us love watching some good acting. And if it's a good storyline that's well written, well, it can leave a lasting impact and impression on the audience. Today's guest joins us from Lethbridge. With me today is Deanna Storfy, and she's with Acting Up Drama and regularly performs one-person dramas. Welcome to Bridge City News, Deanna.
Glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you. Now, first off, can you tell us what is Acting Up Drama all about?
Really, I'm a storyteller. And so I love to bring the stories of faithful Christ followers of the past to life for people and audiences today, just to encourage their faith and also to encourage believers and non-believers alike, just with the goodness of God and his loving kindness that he has shown through the stories of what we would call even Christian heroes of the past.
Great. So could you give us just a snapshot of how you got started with this acting?
Well, it was quite a few years ago. I joined a drama ministry based out of Los Angeles called Covenant Players. And I was like fresh out of high school when I joined them, toured for 2 years. And I learned how to use drama as a means of communicating the gospel. And we traveled all over North America and just brought to life, using drama, just brought to life the gospel and the good news. And so when I settled here in Lethbridge a few years later, I just kept using what I'd learned there and used it in my church. And then I had kids, and I was just always writing dramas and teaching others how to use drama to communicate and to act and to bring plays to life. So I've been doing it for many years, many years. But when I was homeschooling my daughters, I ran across biographies of just people out of history, just ordinary people who had flaws and fears and doubts, but how God used their ordinariness for his purposes. And so as I read those biographies, I realized my friends in church had no idea about many of the stories, like Corrie ten Boom, Gladys Aylward, John Newton, William Carey, Elizabeth Fry. And I'm reading, just eating up these stories, and I'm going, I'd love to use my gifts and abilities to share these stories with other people. And that's how it began.
Wow, that's very interesting. So why do you think that acting seems like a particularly effective way to communicate truth?
Well, it's a very, I would say, non-threatening way of bringing people into a story. Even a short skit or drama is really a short snippet of a story, and so it's not telling people what they should be doing. It's showing them uh, what this truth looks like, and then people take from it what they need to out of it. And so, yeah, so we can sit there and watch a drama or a movie, and you'll get something different than I will. That's the great aspect of drama and story.
Right, it's really like similar to looking at a piece of art on the wall and how different viewers will appreciate a different aspect of a painting, let's say. So does drama draw people in who otherwise perhaps might be hesitant to receive a truth or attend a church service maybe?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's many of the reasons why people will bring me into their church. Specific ministry. It might be seniors, it might be women's, it might just be their church service. In fact, I remember one pastor who invited me to his church in Calgary and asked me to tell the story of John Newton, and which is Amazing Grace, absolutely. And so he's the one who wrote the hymn "Amazing Grace," knowing that many people have sung this hymn at funerals, at even just pretty much everywhere. Everybody, even when I go into the jail, there women will sing "Amazing Grace" because they know at least the first two verses. And so he invited me to come and share, and it was actually during COVID. And this young fellow who had been to church, grew up in church, very strict church though, and so he walked away when he was in his later teens. But he had heard that, saw the sign outside their church that this story of John Newton, Amazing Grace, going to be shared at their service. And so he and his wife came, and he's been out of the church for 20 years. And when I told the story of John Newton from his wife's perspective, at the end, the church followed up with him, and he accepted the Lord, and he started coming to Bible studies. And he was just touched that God still loved them, no matter the fact that he'd walked away, and that God's love and his grace was still evident. And he realized it through story.
Wow. Well, that's a really wonderful testimony and feedback of the ministry that you're able to do. So this type of drama that you do, obviously it's unique in that it's a one-person presentation. And I'd like our viewers to take a quick peek at what that's actually like. So let's roll this clip.
That I am no longer Cornelia ten Boom of Haarlem, Holland. No, you see, I am now number 66730. My sister, number 66729. I moved through the line and I dropped the pillowcase of belongings, but I am holding on to the Bible and the bottle of vitamins. And I pray, oh dear Lord Jesus, please protect your precious word. You see, we ten bombs have grown up reading the word of God every day. And I have found within these pages the reality of the world in which we live, but also the hope and strength that I need for every difficulty.
Tell us, what are some of the challenges of doing all this by yourself?
Because I actually research, I spend months researching the history, the time period, the person's story, and not just from one source, but a variety of sources. So that actually is not always necessarily the difficult part. I love, that's the creative outlet part that I thrive on. And then learning and my lines, memorizing, performing them, that's something I actually enjoy doing as well. But doing it on your own, see, I don't have to worry about, can someone rehearse? Is it conflicting with your schedule? I determine the schedule and I show up every single time. And so I find it easier in that way. But I always love sharing the tools that I've learned about drama to help other people. And I do something called interactive dramas, where I pull people out of the audience. It's a little different than my one-person dramas, but I've written scripts and I pull people out of the audience and they become part of the story. And so there's a few different things that I do. But just doing something on your own, anyone, whether you're a comedian, a preacher, whatever, it's letting people know. The biggest challenge seems to be letting people know what you do and just getting the word out there. But usually when a church has me once, they'll have me back again. And so that's a good part of it.
Well, that's great. Now, something that piqued my curiosity in what you had just said previously was about being in prisons. So have you been able to perform in front of inmates here in Lethbridge at the prison? And if so, what was that like?
So in 2005, I had done research written with the help of a friend, a 2-act play for a local church here in Lethbridge and to put on for Christmas. And it was a big event, and it was 40 actors, and it was all the costume and all the stage. It was a big production. And then afterwards, I thought, wow, like, who's going to go to all this trouble? And I love this story. So I took the story, and it was the story of Elizabeth Fry, prison reformer from England in the 1800s. And that's the story that we brought to life for this church and community Christmas. But I thought, who's going to go to all that trouble? And I turned it into a one-person drama about Elizabeth Fry, not from her perspective, but from an inmate's perspective, doing all the research and everything again. And then the Lord spoke to me and said, I want you to volunteer at the local correctional center. And I went, what? I mean, you can research and you can perform about something, but actually doing it, that was a stretch. And for 6 months, I dug in my heels and just said, I can't do that. I don't know anything about inmates and prisoners and jail, but the Lord would not let me go. And so finally, I volunteered for a women's program, a women's program called WOW, Women of Worth. And it was back in 2005. Julie Kissick from Streets Alive here in Lethbridge and a number of other women from different churches were already in jail, already going once a week to just share the good news with women and bring chocolate. And
Nice.
So I started there. And so as a result, over the years, I would practice my plays on these women. I would literally dress up and go into this chapel and bring to life these stories of John Newton, Corrie ten Boom, who was in prison herself. And the gospel has been shared over and over with women in a very unique way.
Wow. And so do you have some examples of feedback maybe that you can give us of how you've been able to impact people through this?
So one day I was in Sears, back when Sears actually existed as a department store here in Lethbridge, because I've been volunteering at the jail for over 20 years here, or close to 20 years. So here was this gal, and I was in a clothing department, and this gal kept looking at me through the coat racks, and then she came up to me and she said, did you come into the jail? And I said, yeah. And she says, well, I was part of WOW, like one of the prisoners. And I said, oh, really? She goes, I remember the story you did about that woman in the concentration camp. It was fabulous. And it was like years later. Another example, I was on my way to Red Deer with some friends, and we were going to a youth conference from Lethbridge to Edmonton, stopped in Red Deer, just at the Tim Hortons, and I went out for a walk and went into this local restaurant, and the woman behind the till, she says, I know you. And she's like being kind of furtive, and I go, what? Yeah, where from? She goes, jail. And I said, oh, are you in well? She goes, yes. She said, I remember you guys. And she was out and she was doing well and she was working in her, in her restaurant. And she goes, I just loved the stories that you told. So yeah, so there's just so many, but not just from jail, from people in churches too. They'll come up to me years later and still remember, how I brought Corrie ten Boom's story to life. So it's just a very vivid visual, like plays and dramas are just very visual. And you usually remember a story. You don't always remember facts, but you can remember a story.
So then let me ask you, how has this ministry changed you?
Oh my gosh, you can't study the lives of people who surrendered their life and served God. And even in that struggle and the things they did and the mess ups they had, but how they experienced God's grace. And you can't but learn from them. They've been my mentors through the years. And I have learned about prayer. I've learned about obedience. I've learned about surrender from the examples of their lives. It has changed me. And then just stepping out of what's comfortable. I could just stay home and just think about doing this, but their examples were for me to step out of what's comfortable and see where God takes you. And that's what I've been doing all these years.
That's great. So if our viewers would like to have you perform at an event or maybe get in touch with you, how can they do that?
I have a website called actingupdrama.ca, and they can contact me through there.
Good. Well, I'm sure that our viewers enjoyed this conversation and will touch base with you. And I, for one, want to thank you so much for being with us today, Diana.
You're welcome. And thank you for the opportunity to share what I love so much to do.
It was our pleasure. That is Deanna Storfy, and she is with Acting Up Drama here in Lethbridge, Alberta. For all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Michael Clausen. Thanks for watching.